"May I stay tonight?" the Apache girl asked softly. The rancher hesitated. "So, where do I sleep?" The sun was beginning to sink behind the distant hills, casting a warm orange glow across the wide, dusty plains. On the quiet ranch, the only sounds were the soft rustling of the wind through the sparse trees, the low moaning of the cattle in the pens, and the occasional clatter of tools as the rancher finished his late afternoon chores. He was a man used to silence, and most days he enjoyed the company of his own thoughts. His life had always been one of routine, simple and steady, shaped by the rhythm of the land and the seasons. But yet, as peaceful as it often was, the isolation sometimes pressed heavily on him, a quiet weight he had learned to carry alone. That day had been like many others, filled with hard work under the blazing sun. He had mended fences, fed the animals, and checked the irrigation lines. As he wiped sweat from his brow and surveyed the open fields, he noticed something unusual near the edge of his property. A figure was standing there, small and fragile against the vast landscape. At first he thought it might be a traveler passing by, but there was something different about the way she stood, hesitant, cautious, almost unsure. As he squinted, he could make out the features of a young girl, no older than 16 or 17, with long dark hair that framed a dirt-smudged face. Her clothes were worn and patched in several places, and she carried a small bundle close to her chest. For a moment, he did nothing, simply observing from a distance. His instincts told him to be cautious. Encounters with strangers in such a remote place were rare, and he had always been careful about whom he let onto his land. Stories from his neighbors about bandits or conflicts with local tribes lingered in his mind, and a part of him feared the unknown. Yet, even as these thoughts raced through him, he noticed the way she held herself. There was no boldness in her stance, no aggressive demand for attention. Instead, she seemed fragile, vulnerable, and, most strikingly, she seemed lost. Then came her voice, soft and careful, almost hesitant, yet filled with a quiet dignity. "May I stay tonight?" she asked. The words were almost swallowed by the wind, but they carried a weight that made him pause. There was no pleading, no dramatic urgency in her tone. She was not asking for much, only the barest kindness, the simplest mercy of a safe place to rest. Her eyes, wide and earnest, met his, and he felt an unexpected stir of emotion. Compassion, long dormant, rose slowly in his chest. The sight of her small figure against the sprawling ranch, her vulnerability, and her courage to even ask for help, touched something deep within him. The rancher hesitated, unsure how to respond. His mind raced through possibilities, each one shadowed by caution. Allowing her to stay might be risky. He did not know her, and trust did not come easily to him. Yet the thought of sending her away into the open plain as darkness fell filled him with unease. The land could be dangerous, and the night would be cold and lonely. He had seen too many travelers lost to the desert or injured by misfortune. Something about her made him feel a responsibility he had not felt for a long time. Perhaps it was the look in her eyes, a mixture of fear and hope. Or perhaps it was the recognition of loneliness that mirrored his own. Whatever it was, he found himself drawn to her plight, willing to consider an act of kindness he might otherwise have dismissed. Slowly, he made his way toward her, keeping his movements deliberate, careful, and non-threatening. She did not flinch or retreat, only watching him with quiet attention. As he approached, he noticed the small bundle she carried. It was tied with a piece of worn cloth, and from it came the faintest smell of dust and herbs. Whatever she had brought with her, it seemed precious yet light, as though she had carried it with her for days, careful not to let it weigh her down too heavily. I wondered about the journey she had undertaken to reach this place, and the thought of the hardships she must have faced deepened his sense of concern. When he finally stopped a few feet away, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You're a long way from anywhere. Who are you, and why are you here?" His words were measured, meant to invite honesty without sounding threatening. The girl shifted slightly, gripping her bundle a little tighter, as if seeking comfort in its familiarity. Then she took a small, steadying breath and spoke, her words quiet but clear. I don't have anywhere else to go. I was told this place might be safe. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the exhaustion and fear she carried. But there was also a resilience, a quiet strength that made him pause once more. Breath. She was small, yes, but there was courage in her willingness to approach a stranger in a strange land, a courage that demanded respect. The rancher glanced back toward his house, a modest structure that had stood for decades, worn but sturdy. It offered little luxury, only the basics, yet it was shelter, a roof, warmth, and safety. He could offer her that, and perhaps more, a night of rest, a reprieve from the harsh journey she had undertaken. He studied her face again, noting the dirt streaked across her cheeks, the redness around her eyes from long travel, and the faint bruises on her hands. Clearly, she had been on the road for days, if not weeks. The thought of her sleeping under the open sky tonight, alone and unprotected, pressed on him. He could not allow that, not when a simple act of hospitality could make all the difference. Finally, after what felt like an eternity to both of them, he nodded slowly. "You can stay tonight," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Come with me. I'll find you a place to rest." Relief washed over her face, subtle but unmistakable, and she nodded, lowering her bundle and following him with careful steps. She moved quietly, as if not to disturb the peaceful world around them, and the rancher led her toward the house, feeling a strange mixture of apprehension and responsibility. This was new territory for him, unfamiliar and uncertain, yet he could not deny the small spark of warmth that this encounter had kindled in his heart. As they walked together, the rancher found himself noticing the small details, the way her boots were scuffed and worn, the careful way she balanced her bundle, the nervous glance she cast at the animals grazing nearby. She was observant, aware of her surroundings, and yet tentative, as if learning to trust that this moment of safety was real. He realized that she had been trained by hardship, shaped by circumstances far different from his own. And in that realization came a subtle understanding. She was not weak. She had survived. She had traveled alone. And she had dared to ask for help. That combination of vulnerability and courage struck him deeply. When they reached the house, he opened the door and gestured toward a small corner in the main room, modest but clean. "This will be your place for tonight," he said. She glanced around, taking in the simplicity of the space, and then nodded, a quiet gratitude in her eyes. Bare. She settled in carefully, as though each movement mattered, and the rancher could not help but feel a sense of responsibility settle over him like a gentle weight. This night, he realized, would be unlike any other. It was the beginning of something uncertain, something that could change both of their lives, even if he did not yet know how. Brown Andes Mountains dipped fully below the horizon, leaving the sky a canvas of deep blues and purples. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and distant flowers. Inside, the girl adjusted the small blanket she had brought, curling it around her shoulders as she sat quietly. The rancher watched her from a distance, unsure whether to speak or simply let her rest. He felt a mixture of relief, caution, and curiosity. Who was she really? Where had she come from, and why had fate brought her to this lonely ranch at this exact moment? The answers would have to wait. For now, there was only the quiet understanding that they were both alone, both in need of connection, and that sometimes a single act of kindness, simple, unassuming, and human, could mark the beginning of a journey neither of them had expected. The night settled over the ranch with a quiet stillness that felt almost sacred. The stars above twinkled faintly, distant and patient, as if watching the small world below with gentle curiosity. Brr. Inside the modest house, the fire burned low in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the wooden walls. The young Apache girl sat near the corner where she had been allowed to stay, her bundle carefully beside her. She unwrapped the small blanket she had carried and smoothed it out over the floor. It was not much, but it offered her a sense of control, a tiny piece of order in a world that had seemed chaotic and dangerous for so long. The rancher moved about the house with quiet efficiency, gathering a few simple supplies for her and himself. He prepared a small meal, stewed beans, a piece of cornbread, and water, enough to nourish without extravagance. The smell filled the room with warmth and a sense of familiarity, a reminder of the steady, simple life he led. He did not speak much, but his actions spoke volumes, showing that the girl's presence was not entirely unwelcome. But he set a small plate near her, and she looked up with eyes that held both hesitation and gratitude. She nodded quietly, murmuring a soft thank you, before beginning to eat, careful and polite, as if mindful not to impose. For a long while the room was filled only with the sound of the fire and the faint scratching of utensils on the plate. Neither spoke much, both wary of breaking the fragile peace that had settled between them. The rancher watched her occasionally from across the room, noticing the way she moved, deliberate, precise, cautious. She did not rush, nor did she fidget, and there was a certain dignity in her composure that he could not help but admire. She was a young girl, certainly, but she carried herself with the quiet strength of someone who had learned to survive in a harsh world.
As the meal ended, the girl carefully cleaned her small dish and placed it neatly aside.
Breaths. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke softly, almost as if testing the sound of her own voice. I don't want to trouble you," she said. Her words were careful, respectful, but carried a hint of vulnerability. She looked down at her hands, folded neatly in her lap, and the rancher felt a pang of sympathy.
Breaking.
"You're not troubling me," he said gently. "It's only one night."
That's all, Brace. The girl's eyes met his, and for a moment, a quiet understanding passed between them. She had traveled far, and he had lived alone for many years, yet both of them knew the value of simple kindness. In that small acknowledgment, a bridge began to form between two very different lives. The rancher felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a mixture of relief, compassion, and curiosity. It was strange to find himself so aware of another person's presence, yet it felt right, natural even. After a short silence, the girl shifted slightly, glancing around the room with cautious interest. This is very different from my home," she said softly. Her voice was curious, tinged with both wonder and nervousness. "Brass, we don't have houses like this. We live in open spaces, near the rivers and mountains." "My family. We move with the seasons, following the land." She paused, then added, almost as if remembering something important. "I've been traveling alone for some days. It was not safe. I didn't know where to go." The rancher listened, his eyes studying her carefully. He had heard stories of the Apache people, of the struggles and resilience that shaped their lives. But hearing it from her, so directly, added a depth he could not ignore. He realized that she was not simply a girl in need of shelter. She was someone shaped by her culture, her family, and her experiences. She carried all of that with her, silently, in the way she spoke, moved, and held herself. He felt a growing respect, a recognition that her journey had been difficult and that her courage was remarkable. "I see," he said quietly, his voice measured but thoughtful. "You've come a long way. It must have been hard traveling alone." The girl nodded, her lips pressing together as if to hold back more than just words.
Yes, it was, she admitted. I had to be careful.
There are places I could not go safely, and people I could not trust, but I wanted to reach somewhere that might be safe, even for just a night. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of experience beyond her years. For a while the room fell silent again, each of them lost in thought. The fire crackled softly, and the night outside remained calm, a protective blanket over the ranch. The rancher found himself studying her quietly, noticing the small details, the dirt on her boots, the tiny scratches on her hands, the tiredness that made her movements careful and deliberate. She had been on the move for so long, yet she carried herself with quiet dignity, refusing to let exhaustion show too heavily. In a strange way, her resilience reminded him of the cattle he had raised, strong and enduring, shaped by the land and weathered by experience. "I should get some rest," he finally said, breaking the silence. "It's been a long day for both of us." The girl nodded, rising carefully from the floor, her movements cautious to avoid startling him or disrupting the fragile peace. She picked up her bundle and settled near the corner of the room, laying the small blanket over herself. The rancher watched her for a moment, feeling a mixture of responsibility and curiosity. He did not know her story fully, nor did he understand where her path would lead, but he knew that for this one night he had provided safety. That realization gave him a quiet sense of satisfaction, a small light in the routine of his otherwise solitary life. As she settled, the girl glanced at him hesitantly. "Thank you," she whispered. It was a simple expression, but it carried more than words could say. Gratitude, relief, and perhaps a spark of trust. The rancher nodded silently, acknowledging her words without overcomplicating them, but in that quiet exchange both felt the beginnings of connection, fragile but genuine, forming between them. The night deepened, and the quiet sounds of the ranch, cattle breathing, wind rustling through the trees, distant owls calling softly, enveloped them. The girl lay on the floor, her head resting lightly on her bundle, while the rancher continued his quiet routine, ensuring that the animals were safe and the house secure. Despite the small, simple tasks, there was a sense of companionship in the shared space, an unspoken understanding that they were not alone in this moment. Slowly, conversation began to flow, gentle and tentative. The girl spoke of her family, of the traditions she cherished, of the landscapes she had known and loved. She spoke of the rivers that ran near her home, the mountains that rose proudly in the distance, and the animals that moved freely across the land. Her voice was soft but vivid with imagery, painting pictures of a life so different from the quiet ranch, yet full of its own beauty and resilience. The rancher listened intently, fascinated not only by her words but by the sense of connection they fostered. In return, he shared small stories from his own life, tales of hard work, of the changing seasons, of quiet nights on the ranch when the stars seemed closer than ever. He spoke of the challenges he had faced, the isolation he had endured, and the satisfaction he found in small victories, like mending a fence or watching the first shoots of spring grass appear. Their stories intertwined, contrasting yet complementary, bridging two worlds that had never met in such close proximity. By the time the fire burned low and the room was filled with shadows, both of them felt a quiet closeness, a fragile trust that had grown from nothing but kindness and shared humanity. The girl, once cautious and wary, began to relax, curling slightly closer to her blanket and allowing herself to rest. The rancher, usually solitary and reserved, felt a warmth he had long forgotten, a reminder that even in a life of routine and isolation, connection was possible. Outside, the desert night stretched endlessly, calm and watchful. Inside, the small room on the ranch had become a space of safety and understanding, where two very different lives had intersected and found a moment of peace. The night held promise, not of grand adventures or immediate resolutions, but of trust, of learning, and of the quiet beginnings of something meaningful. In this shared silence, both the rancher and the Apache girl understood that they were no longer entirely alone, and that the smallest acts of kindness could shape the path of a life in ways they could not yet imagine. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, sending flickering shadows dancing across the walls of the small ranch house. Outside, the desert night was still, the stars bright and silent, casting a gentle glow over the land. Inside, the young Apache girl sat on the floor, her legs tucked beneath her, the small blanket she had brought wrapped loosely around her shoulders. The rancher had settled into his chair nearby, careful to keep a respectful distance, yet close enough that the warmth of the fire seemed to connect them both. For a long while, neither spoke. The girl traced the edge of her blanket with her fingers, lost in thought, while the rancher polished a worn tool, his movements slow and deliberate. Desk. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that forms when two people are present with each other without needing to fill the space with words. The quiet of the night combined with the warmth of the fire created a sense of calm, a temporary pause from the worries and hardships of the outside world. Finally, the girl spoke, her voice low and hesitant, almost afraid it might break the fragile atmosphere. "I don't usually stay in houses like this," she said. I usually sleep under the sky or near the river." But it was too dangerous tonight. She looked down at her hands, small and calloused from travel, and the rancher noticed a faint tremble in her fingers.
He said nothing at first, simply watching her, letting her find the words she needed to express.
"I was trying to reach my family," she continued, her eyes glistening in the firelight.
"They moved to the north, near the mountains, but I got lost."
I didn't know which way to go. There were nights I had to hide, and days I had to run to stay safe. Her voice wavered slightly, but there was a strength beneath it, a resilience that shone through her fatigue. The rancher listened quietly, moved by her honesty. He realized that this girl, so young and alone, had endured more in a few weeks than most people experienced in a lifetime.
He set the tool aside and leaned back in his chair, his eyes meeting hers.
"You've been very brave," he said. "I don't think I could have done what you did, traveling alone in the desert like that. It's not easy, and you faced it without complaint." She looked up at him, startled by his words, and for a moment her guard seemed to slip.
Brain. A small, tentative smile appeared, fleeting but genuine.
"I had to try," she admitted softly.
"I couldn't stay lost forever." The firelight played across her face, illuminating the small details the rancher had not noticed before. The delicate curve of her cheekbones, the depth of her dark eyes, the faint lines of worry etched into her youthful face. Breaths. He felt a sudden awareness of the fragility of life, and the weight of responsibility pressed gently upon him. She was here, now, and it was his choice to provide safety and comfort, if only for a night. After a pause, the girl began to speak of her life before she had been forced to travel alone. She spoke of her family, of the people in her village, and of the land she had known since childhood. She described the rivers where she had learned to fish, the hills where she had run freely, and the traditions that had shaped her daily life. Her words were soft but vivid, painting a picture of a world rich with color and memory, a world so different from the quiet ranch, yet equally full of meaning. The rancher listened intently, fascinated not only by her words but by the way she spoke. There was pride in her voice, a quiet respect for her heritage, and a deep connection to the land she described. He realized that she was more than a traveler in need of shelter. She was a keeper of her culture, carrying knowledge, traditions, and memories that had been passed down through generations. Her stories, though simple, were powerful, and they left him with a sense of awe and respect. In return, he shared small pieces of his own life, not as a boast, but as a way to bridge the gap between their experiences. He spoke of the ranch, of the long hours spent tending to animals and fields, of the satisfaction that came from watching his work flourish. He described the quiet nights, the changing seasons, and the rhythm of life that had become so familiar to him. As he spoke, he realized that though their worlds were different, the challenges they faced were not entirely unlike each other. Both required patience, resilience, and a careful understanding of the environment around them. The girl listened with rapt attention, her eyes wide and shining in the firelight. For the first time in many days, she felt a sense of connection, a realization that someone understood, even partially, the struggles she had faced. She asked questions, small but meaningful, about the ranch, the animals, and the land itself. The rancher answered patiently, enjoying the curiosity she displayed, and found himself explaining things he had long taken for granted. It was a conversation built on trust, each learning from the other, each acknowledging the value of the other's experiences. Passed, as the fire burned low and the room seemed to shrink around them, filled with the warmth of shared stories and quiet understanding. The girl spoke of moments of fear, of nights when she had wondered if she would survive, and the rancher listened without judgment, offering only small reassurances. "You were right to keep moving," he said softly. "You had to be careful. You did what you needed to do to stay safe. That takes courage." She nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight, and for a moment she seemed lighter, as if the burden of her journey had been eased, if only slightly, by sharing it. The rancher felt a sense of protectiveness grow within him. He had always been self-reliant, accustomed to handling life alone, but there was something about this girl, her vulnerability and her bravery combined, that stirred an instinct to care for her. He wanted to ensure she was safe, that she could rest without fear, that she would not have to face the harshness of the desert alone tonight.
It was a responsibility he accepted willingly, though he had never thought of himself as particularly kind or nurturing.
Outside, the night deepened, the desert wind whispering against the walls of the house, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and dry earth. Inside, the girl curled closer to her blanket, feeling a rare sense of security. But she realized that the rancher had not only provided her with shelter, but also with a quiet space where she could share her story without fear of judgment. That alone felt like a gift she had not known she needed. As the fire dwindled to glowing embers, they fell into a comfortable silence once more. The girl's eyes grew heavy with sleep, and the rancher felt a quiet satisfaction knowing she could rest safely. He reflected on the unlikely connection that had formed between them in just a few hours. A connection built on trust, shared humanity, and the simple act of listening. For both of them, it was a reminder that even in a world filled with challenges and uncertainty, small moments of kindness and understanding could create lasting bonds. Before she finally drifted off, the girl looked up at him once more, her expression soft and sincere.
Britt.
Thank you, she whispered again. It was simple yet heartfelt, carrying more meaning than words could fully capture.
The rancher nodded silently, feeling a deep sense of purpose and quiet joy. He had offered safety and kindness, and in return, he had been given a glimpse into a life so different from his own, yet equally rich and full of courage. As the night wore on, the room grew quiet except for the gentle crackling of the embers. The rancher watched over the girl for a while, ensuring that she was comfortable and at peace. Then, satisfied that she was safe, he returned to his own small corner of the room, settling in for the night. But outside, the desert stretched endlessly, silent and watchful, while inside, two very different lives rested under the same roof, connected by trust, understanding, and the quiet power of shared stories. The next morning, the ranch seemed calm, almost ordinary, but the sky held a promise of change. Dark clouds had begun to gather on the horizon, their heavy shapes moving steadily closer with a low rumble of distant thunder. The rancher noticed the shift immediately. He had lived on this land long enough to read the signs, to feel the change in the air before the storm fully arrived. He glanced at the young Apache girl, who was quietly tending to her bundle, her small hands folding the blanket with care. She noticed his gaze and raised an eyebrow, a faint curiosity in her expression. "It looks like a storm is coming," he said quietly. "We should make sure everything is ready before it hits." The girl nodded, her dark eyes alert and focused. Though young, She had learned to move carefully and think ahead. Together, they moved through the ranch, checking the animals and securing the pens. The wind was picking up now, tugging at the sparse trees and sending dust swirling across the open land. It was a restless, urgent wind, one that reminded them both that nature could be as unpredictable as it was beautiful. The rancher showed her how to check the gates and the fence lines, explaining why it was important to secure them tightly. If the wind gets too strong, the animals might panic,
he said.
And a loose gate could mean disaster. She listened carefully, absorbing each instruction with a seriousness beyond her years. When she spoke, it was thoughtful and measured.
I understand. We have to think ahead or the storm will take everything. Her voice carried an unexpected wisdom, a reflection of the hardships she had already endured on her journey. By mid-morning, the storm was upon them. The sky darkened to a deep gray, and sheets of rain began to fall, first lightly, then with growing intensity. The wind howled across the plains, rattling the wooden beams of the ranch house and whipping the trees into violent motion. Inside, the rancher and the girl moved quickly, working together to protect the animals, cover supplies, and secure anything that could be damaged by the storm. Reels.
Each task required coordination, speed, and careful attention, and they found themselves relying on each other more than either had anticipated.
At first, the rancher's concern was practical, keeping the animals safe, making sure the house and fences held against the storm. But as the wind roared louder and the rain fell harder, he began to feel a deeper sense of protectiveness toward the girl. She was small, fragile in appearance, and yet remarkably capable. But the storm was a force of nature, and he knew that even the strongest person could be caught off guard.
Every time she slipped on the wet ground or stumbled while carrying a bucket of water for the animals, he was there to steady her, his hands steady and sure, his voice calm and guiding.
Hours passed in this intense rhythm.
The storm showed no mercy, and yet they worked tirelessly, side by side, a silent partnership forming between them. The girl moved quickly, following his instructions without question, her trust in him growing with every passing hour. And the rancher, usually so self-reliant and solitary, began to understand how comforting it was to share the responsibility with someone else, to feel that he was not entirely alone in facing the forces of the world. During a brief lull in the storm, they paused inside the barn, leaning against the sturdy wooden beams, wet and exhausted. The girl's dark hair clung to her face, her clothes soaked through, but her eyes shone with a mixture of relief and determination. "We did it," she said softly, a hint of pride in her voice. "The animals are safe, and nothing seems damaged, too badly at least." The rancher nodded, allowing a small, rare smile to cross his face. "You've been a great help," he said. "I don't know how I would have managed alone." She smiled faintly in return, a silent acknowledgement of their shared effort and growing bond. As the storm resumed its relentless rhythm, the rancher found a quiet moment to reflect on the situation. He realized that allowing her to leave in the morning, as he had first intended, might not be wise. She had traveled far and alone, faced dangers and uncertainties, and yet he had never seen anyone so capable or determined. Still, the risks outside the ranch were high, and the thought of her facing the storm alone filled him with unease. He understood, with surprising clarity, that he wanted to keep her safe, not just for tonight, but for as long as she needed protection. The girl, sensing his unspoken concern, approached him cautiously. "Will the storm last long?" she asked, her voice low and hesitant. The rancher shook his head. "It could go on for hours," he said. "We'll have to stay alert." Narration and then transferred. "It's not safe to go outside until it passes." She nodded, accepting his guidance with quiet trust. In that moment, a subtle but powerful understanding passed between them. He would protect her, and she would follow his lead, relying on his experience while offering her own courage and resourcefulness in return. As the afternoon wore on, the storm grew more intense. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind shrieked around the corners of the house, rattling loose boards and whistling through the gaps. The girl clutched her blanket tightly, seeking comfort and warmth, while the rancher moved from room to room, checking on the animals, ensuring that water did not flood the barn, and securing doors against the force of the wind. The work was exhausting, and yet neither of them complained. They understood the stakes, and their shared sense of purpose kept them focused and determined. Reyes. During a brief pause, the rancher took a moment to look at the girl, noticing how small she seemed against the vastness of the world outside. Despite her youth, her resilience was remarkable, her determination evident in every movement. He realized that her courage had earned his respect, and that he felt a protective instinct he had never known before. In his long years on the ranch, he had cared for animals, for the land, but he had rarely felt such a responsibility for another human being, someone who depended on him entirely in that moment. The girl, sensing his gaze, looked up at him with quiet eyes. Breath. "Thank you," she whispered again, a simple phrase, but full of meaning. He nodded, his expression calm but tender.
"You don't have to thank me," he said. "I'll keep you safe."
That's all that matters right now. Her lips curved in a small, grateful smile, and for the first time in days she felt a sense of relief that went beyond the storm itself. She was safe here, with someone who understood her needs, someone who would guide her through the dangers outside. By late afternoon, the storm began to show signs of slowing, though the sky remained dark and heavy. Puddles formed across the ranch, and the wind, while less fierce, still rattled the buildings and trees. The rancher and the girl moved cautiously, checking the animals and ensuring that the damage from the storm was minimal. The shared experience of surviving the storm created a deep sense of connection between them. It was more than mutual respect. It was a bond forged in shared effort, in facing the unpredictable together, and in the understanding that the world could be both harsh and beautiful. As evening approached, the storm finally began to subside, leaving behind a landscape glistening with rain and softened by the fresh moisture. The rancher and the girl returned to the house, exhausted but triumphant. The girl collapsed near her blanket, her wet hair clinging to her cheeks, and the rancher gave a small nod of approval. "You did well today," he said. "We both did." Her eyes shone faintly in the firelight, and she nodded, a mixture of pride and relief in her expression. That night, as the wind died down and the rain slowed to gentle drops, they sat near the fire, their bodies still tired from the day's work. The rancher watched the girl carefully, realizing that his earlier decision to let her stay for just one night might have been too limited. She had proven herself capable, resilient, and trustworthy, yet still vulnerable to the harshness of the outside world. Brace. He felt a quiet certainty that keeping her safe for as long as she needed was not just a choice, it was the right thing to do. The girl, sensing his thoughts, looked up at him and asked softly, "Will I be safe here?" The rancher met her gaze steadily. "Yes," he said. "As long as you stay here, you will be safe. Promise." She nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and quiet trust. That moment, simple yet profound, marked a turning point in their relationship. They were no longer just a rancher and a girl passing through. They were companions, connected by shared struggle and mutual care. Bay. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, calm after the storm, the air fresh and clean. Inside, the fire burned low, casting gentle light over two figures who had weathered a challenge together and emerged stronger, more aware of each other's presence and value. The rancher, usually so solitary, felt the warmth of responsibility and companionship, while the girl, once wary and uncertain, felt the comfort of safety and trust. In that quiet evening, both realized that the storm had done more than test their endurance. It had cemented a bond, a fragile but real connection that would guide them through the days ahead. Morning came slowly after the storm, spreading soft light across the ranch. The clouds that had covered the sky all day had begun to drift away, revealing patches of blue and the bright golden rays of the sun. The desert felt fresh, as if it had been washed clean by the rain. Puddles reflected the sunlight, and the scent of wet earth filled the air. Birds chirped cautiously as they ventured out from their hiding places, and the ranch, though messy from the storm, seemed alive with quiet hope. Inside the house, the young Apache girl stirred beneath her blanket. She stretched carefully, feeling the warmth of the fire fading and the coolness of the morning air brushing against her skin. Her dark eyes flicked around the room, landing on the rancher who was already awake, quietly tending to some of the chores that had piled up overnight. The bond between them, built over the last 2 days, was subtle but powerful. She no longer felt like a stranger in this place, and he no longer felt like she was simply a guest he had sheltered. They were companions in a shared moment of life, shaped by the hardships they had faced together. The girl rose, still cautious but more confident than before, and moved toward the corner where her small blanket had been. She began to fold it neatly, mindful of the effort the rancher had made to provide her with a safe place to sleep. The rancher watched quietly, giving her space yet remaining close enough that she could feel supported if she needed guidance. Silence between them was gentle, filled with understanding rather than tension. For the first time in many nights, the girl felt a sense of calm that was not rooted in fear or exhaustion, but in the knowledge that she was safe. "I can help feed the animals," she said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was low but steady, and the rancher nodded in approval.
Yes, that would be helpful, he replied. We still need to make sure everything is ready for the day. She picked up a bucket and followed him to the barn, her steps light and careful on the wet, muddy ground.
Together they moved through the routine tasks of the ranch, their actions in quiet coordination. Though the work was demanding, it no longer felt lonely. There was a shared rhythm in their movements, a silent understanding of each other's presence and intentions. After tending to the animals, they returned to the house for breakfast. The rancher prepared a simple meal of eggs and bread, while the girl helped set the table, carefully placing the plates and utensils. "Bud," she spoke quietly about the storm from the night before, describing how the wind had frightened her, yet also how she had learned to move quickly and stay calm. The rancher listened with patience, occasionally nodding, occasionally offering small pieces of advice or encouragement. There was a quiet joy in the conversation, a reminder that even after fear and hardship, life could offer moments of connection and learning. Once breakfast was finished, they stepped outside to inspect the ranch. The storm had left its mark. The fence had shifted in some places, a small tree had fallen, and some of the ground was washed out. They walked side by side, evaluating the work that needed to be done, the girl asking questions about how to repair certain areas, and the rancher showing her the proper techniques. She listened carefully, absorbing every instruction, her hands learning the strength and precision needed to maintain the land.
It was a teaching moment, but it was also a shared one, a partnership formed not only by necessity, but by mutual respect.
As the day progressed, a quiet understanding settled between them. The rancher realized that this girl was no longer just a visitor. She had become part of his life, at least for now. And the girl, once cautious and uncertain, felt a growing sense of belonging in this space that had offered her safety when the outside world was harsh. They worked together, laughed softly at small mistakes, and shared quiet moments of observation. The way sunlight fell on the fields, the playful behavior of a calf, the distant cry of a hawk. In these simple details, they discovered comfort in companionship, a recognition that even in a world filled with uncertainty, trust and kindness could endure. By afternoon, the sun had fully broken through the clouds, casting long shadows across the ranch. The girl sat near the fire, mending a small tear in her blanket, while the rancher checked the fence lines. He watched her quietly, noticing the careful way she worked, the concentration in her eyes, and the faint smile that appeared when she successfully finished a stitch. He felt a sense of pride, not only in the work being done, but in the resilience and determination she had shown since arriving. It was clear that she had grown stronger in this short time, not only because of her actions, but because of the trust and guidance he had offered. As evening approached, they both returned to the house. The rancher poured water into a basin, while the girl carefully cleaned her hands and face. There was a sense of routine, comfort, and normalcy, yet it was layered with the awareness of what had transpired in the past days. The storm, the journey, the shared moments of quiet understanding. Both of them felt a subtle shift in their relationship, an acknowledgement that they had moved beyond mere hospitality or survival. There was a bond forming, one built on trust, courage, and the recognition of each other's humanity. The girl looked at the rancher with a tentative question in her eyes. "So, where do I sleep tonight?" she asked softly, echoing the first words she had spoken when she arrived. Her voice was calm, but there was a trace of vulnerability beneath it. The rancher paused, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He had hesitated at that question once, unsure how to respond, but now, after the experiences they had shared, he felt certain. "You sleep where you like," he said gently. "It's your choice. You've earned the space here." She looked relieved and nodded, understanding the generosity in his words. There was no need for further explanation. His actions had already shown her that she was welcome. She arranged her blanket carefully in the corner, settling in with a sense of security she had not felt in many nights. The rancher watched her, feeling a quiet contentment. It was a simple moment, yet it carried profound meaning. Her safety, trust, and mutual respect were established, in the future, though uncertain, now held the promise of connection and understanding. Night fell again, and the fire burned softly in the hearth. Outside, the desert stretched under the stars, calm and vast. Inside, the rancher and the girl sat near the fire, sharing small stories of their pasts, their hopes, and their dreams. The girl spoke of her family, her village, and the traditions she hoped to return to one day. The rancher spoke of the land, the cycles of life on the ranch, and the quiet satisfaction he found in his daily routines. Each word, each story, was a thread weaving their lives together, strengthening the bond that had begun with a simple question: "May I stay tonight?" The hours passed in quiet companionship. The girl eventually lay down, curling beneath her blanket with a sense of peace she had not felt for a long time. The rancher sat near the fire, keeping watch until he was certain she was asleep, and then he too settled down for the night. There was no grand declaration or dramatic moment, only the gentle understanding that they had found something rare, a connection forged through trust, kindness, and shared experience. In the quiet of the night, both felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The storm, the journey, and the challenges had brought them together, but it was a small, consistent acts of care that had built the true foundation of their relationship. The rancher realized that offering safety and guidance had not only helped the girl, but had enriched his own life, reminding him of the value of companionship and human connection. The girl understood that trust could exist even with strangers, and that kindness could be found in unexpected places. As the dawn approached, the first light of the new day filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow across the room. The rancher and the girl rose together, ready to face the day, strengthened by the experiences they had shared. Though the future was uncertain, she would eventually continue her journey and he would return to his quiet life. They knew that their paths had intersected meaningfully. A bond had been formed, one that neither distance nor circumstance could erase. For the rancher, the simple question she had asked on her first night, "May I stay tonight?" now carried a profound significance. It had been the beginning of trust, understanding, and mutual care. And for the girl, the quiet acceptance and protection he had offered had shown her that even in a harsh world, safety and kindness were possible. Together, in the warmth of the small ranch house, they had discovered that sometimes the smallest gestures, a shared meal, a secure corner, a listening ear, could shape lives, heal fears, and build connections that endure far beyond a single night. And so, in the gentle light of morning, the rancher looked at the girl and said with a quiet smile, "So, where do you sleep?" Not as a question of uncertainty, but as a gesture of welcoming, a sign that she was safe, accepted, and valued. She smiled in return, settling into her space with a sense of belonging, and for the first time in many days, both felt a quiet peace, knowing that they had found companionship, trust, and understanding in each other's presence.